My name is Joel Gurin. I'm a senior advisor at the Gov Lab at New York University and also direct the Open Data 500 project there as well. And we're very fortunate today to have a panel that will be able to give you several different perspectives on open data, on productivity, on the uses of open data for economic value, for social value. I want to just say a few words. It is loud here, isn't it? Okay. If at some point we are drowned out, just tell us so, and we'll speak even louder. We have agreed to do this panel in English, which is largely because I unfortunately do not speak Spanish, but we can take questions in either language, and thank you for that. So I want to just say a little bit both about the work that we're doing at NYU and about this particular panel. The Gov Lab, which is where I'm based and some of my colleagues here are based as well, is an organization that is designed to help improve the connections between government and citizens and institutions, both businesses and social institutions. So it's very much about open government, but it's really about applied open government. It's about thinking about how we can apply the lessons of open government and particularly open data to public sector problems and private sector problems. As part of that work, we have launched a project called the Open Data 500, which is an attempt to study companies based in the United States that use open government data as a key business resource. And we are very, very honored that the government of Mexico has invited us to collaborate with them to do the Open Data 100 Mexico, a study of 100 Mexican companies. You can see this at opendata500.com/mx. And if you go back to Sala Uno, there is an orange table there with people who can give you more information, particularly Catherine Garcia, if you'd like to just stand up, from the Gov Lab, can tell you about the project. We would be very, very interested in your participation. We are interested in doing this project in other countries as well as throughout Latin America, and would love to have your input and your feedback. So today's panel is really very much along the lines of some of the talks you heard this morning from Alejandra Lagunas, who was kind enough to mention our project in her talk, from Enrique Jacob, who talked about the use of open data in entrepreneurship. We have on this panel several people who have done very entrepreneurial work with open data in different ways. I'm going to introduce each one just before they talk. And we will certainly have time for questions at the end, but if at any point you have a question for one of the speakers, just raise your hand and we'll take questions in the middle of the panel as well. And of course we'll have some discussion, and I will try to ask them all some difficult questions. So thank you for being here, and let me introduce our first panelist. So our first panelist to my left is Alejandro Cantu. He is currently the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Sky Alert, which is a satellite earthquake early warning system. He also has background in using open data around traffic information, in app development, and he was recently named this year one of the MIT Technology Review Innovators Under 35, really in recognition of outstanding creative technological work. So Alejandro, please tell us about what you do and how you use open data.
Thanks, Joel. Hello, everyone. My name is Alejandro Cantu. I'm the CEO of Sky Alert. You probably know us as the earthquake alert warning guys. What we do, or what we have been doing, is creating a system that would deliver the information, the open data, for people to be useful in order to take it and take prevention matters into their own hands. When we talk about an earthquake or a natural disaster, information is one of the key things that we can do before and after an earthquake. So what do we do? How do we transfer this information when we have to give this information to all of you guys? So we developed all these kinds of new systems, applications, products for offices, products for homes, cheap devices, expensive devices, that would help us to take this information into society, so society can take the information and take matters in their own hands. So what is productivity for us, or what is open data doing for us? For us, it's all about cost reduction and cost prevention. When you talk about a natural disaster and you have the information in time, you can make a lot of cost savings and do a lot of things that would help just not even to save lives, but also to save different kind of assets that people might have in their industry or in the work panel. So that is what we do. That is how we take the open data that is provided by the government and different sources, that we can give it out to you guys through a different panel of technology, so we can make it a more safe society and we can have a more complete prevention plan in order to save lives and save assets.
Tell me a little bit, could you talk a little bit, Alejandro, just about the kinds of open data you use? I mean, a lot of it I'm sure is seismic data, but do you also intersect with government agencies that work on disaster relief? Or how do you apply it? How do you go from the alerts to actually helping people who are impacted by these events?
All right, that is a very good question. What we do is we take information from the government system or the earthquake alert system. We have also invested into getting our own earthquake detection system in the coast so we can get more data. And what we do with this data is we make it public through around different kind of sources, such as Twitter, where you can follow us at SkyAlertMX, or if you want to see the live data that the earthquake sensors are putting in, it's at SkyAlertER. So what we do is we want to share all this information, not just what the government is providing to us, it's also what we generate, so we can make that public, so people can understand and can see how hard the earthquake is actually affecting, or how hard it affected the area, even before reports came in. So that's the way we do it. And also, what we try to do is using our social media and using our social applications, is that we can connect people that are needing help. We are very aware that once a natural disaster affects, the government response is always adequate and strong, but the society response is it's way more stronger and powerful. And I think that we have proven this in Mexico many, many times with different kinds of disasters. So what we want to do also is to share all this information between your contacts, between your own family, and to see that if they are okay, that you can go and help them. And if they're not okay, so they can tell you where are they, what kind of problem are they having, so you can focus the society help that will help after a disaster into helping all these people on a society basis.
So that it's essentially, so it's almost a sort of social network that you create where people can help each other as well. It's a very interesting kind of open data. We have a company in the US called PulsePoint that has done a similar kind of thing where they actually register anybody who knows how to do, I don't know the word in Spanish, CPR, cardiac pulmonary resuscitation. Somebody's having a heart attack, they register everybody who knows how to do this, and then if you're having a heart attack and you're in their network, then it will send a signal to the closest person who can help save your life, and they will get to you immediately. So I think this trend of using open data to sort of enable people to help each other is an interesting one, and it sounds like part of what you do as well.
Exactly, that's what we want to do. We want to just not get the information that we can transfer, so we can also generate it, and also what we can do with that information, and how can we make it work for society.
Terrific. I'd also like, so Matt, let's go on to you. One of the things, Alejandro, that you talked about was the fact that you not only use open data, but you produce data that you then make open. And Matt, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about that as well as what you do. Matt is the founder and chief executive officer of Grand Data. He studied at the University of Buenos Aires and is now based in Palo Alto, California. And your company really integrates first-party and telco partner data from telecommunications companies to understand market trends and predict consumer behavior. And my understanding is that you use both private data and public data to do your work, and you try to release some of the data you collect as public data. Is that correct? And tell us a little bit about how that works and how you see this field.
Thank you, Joel. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for being here. my company, Grand Data, what we do, we have a data monetization company. We basically get data from telcos, banks, and retailers. We get anonymous data. We can't identify people from that data. We process that data, we identify insights, and then we sell these insights to marketing agencies, global banks, and so on. So as you can see, just to give you an idea of the volume, we process every day about 30 billion events from 300 million people. So it's a lot of data, but it's also closed data, as opposite to open data. So you might be wondering why I am here, and I think that I'm here because I am thinking through how we can use our company and our positioning to actually help pushing this data opening ecosystem in which I believe very strongly. And just going back to your question, I think that there are mainly three types of things that we can do in Grand Data, or we are actually doing in Grand Data related to the open data ecosystem. The first one is, of course, using open data as a complementary resource for closed data. And this is something that everybody kind of is doing, mainly enriching their closed data processing with open data. One example that we have in Grand Data is that we estimate the household income for every individual. And we use telco data to do that. And from telco mobility data, we can infer to a certain degree of approximation where you live and where you work. And then we use census open data to put a monetary value to each of those areas. So now we have where you live and how valuable are those areas where you live and work. So this can use for our income estimation algorithms. The second case is kind of a little bit more tricky. It's all the way around. It's using closed data to generate open data. So I will give you one example that we work with MIT. We generate origin destination matrices for a government using telco data, telco mobility data. This is kind of proprietary data, but once we calculated the open destination, the origin destination matrices, then this data became public. So I know this is kind of halfway from a full open data ecosystem, but I think that it might be useful to kind of a soft transitioning from closed to open data. And finally, I think that we can help in this opening closed data movement from Grand Data, because we all know that the big question for a big data owner is why we should open our data, why a big bank or a big telco or Facebook or Google should open this data. And I don't certainly have a comprehensive answer to that question, but I believe that there is one use case that should drive this opening, which is open data for social good. And I really believe that the telcos, the bank, Facebook, and Google have a moral obligation to open this data, at least for social good.
Yeah, and aren't there some examples? I think the telco company Orange, I'm now forgetting which country, but has released some of their data in an anonymized way. Can you talk about some of the places this has actually happened? Because I think the idea of taking business data, closed data, and making it open is actually a huge idea. And I would love to hear one or two cases of companies that have found that they can do this without undercutting their own business.
Absolutely. So one example is with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So we are kind of working with them to understand. So they're basically focusing on two important health problems, which are the Ebola and the malaria problems. And if you look at the malaria problem, it's very important to understand how populations move in one country. So if you go to Tanzania or if you go to Kenya, there's been done a collaborative effort with telcos in those countries to get telco data. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but you're holding a mobile phone that talks to a cell tower every second, and that cell tower is geographically referenced. So telcos kind of know to a certain degree of precision where you guys are all the time. So the basic idea is taking all this data to understand population's movement, to try to understand where the next malaria or Ebola outbreak will happen.
That's a fantastic example of what the kind of thing that people I think are starting to call data philanthropy. I mean, you said, telcos or Google, you feel have sort of a moral obligation to release data in the public good. I hope this is something we can talk about a bit more. The other thing that I want to come back to after Moise and Jeff have talked is the other tricky thing is that when you release private data publicly, you have to deal with all sorts of privacy issues, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to say about that. But thank you. So let's go on now to Moise Cherem, who is the director of Innova. I think Moise, some of what Matt was just talking about in terms of the social good that comes from open data is very, very relevant to the work that you do. So you actually have received the World Economic Forum of Latin America's Social Entrepreneurs Award of the Year. Congratulations. And as the founder of Innova, and the work that you do, as I understand it, is really about building small, cost-effective educational centers that also use open data as part of their operations. So please tell us about that work.
So thank you. In Innova, what we do is we create blended learning schools in low-income areas all across Mexico. A blended learning school essentially implies that students come in, they have access to e-learning content, but with the help of a facilitator. And since we started this project, we started collecting all of the interactions that were happening at our schools. So each student has a digital file, and every single thing they do is stored. There are many challenges into using all of this information. First of all, you need to make sense of the information. Something we realized was how difficult it was to actually derive interesting conclusions from all the data that you're gathering. And secondly, in the field of education, what becomes really tricky is that you need to create hypotheses into what will make a better course or what will make a better e-learning product, test them, and to do that through a series of iterations until you can actually say that you have improved your courses based on data rather than just perceptions. The field of education is very interesting, and it has to do with productivity. First of all, because the government spends a lot of money on education. So it's about 22% of the national budget. And the amount of data that we have in the field of education is extremely scarce. So just this week, the Ministry of Education was obliged to release a lot of information from a census that was conducted last year. This was the first census of its type. And sometimes when we're thinking about open data and big data, we're thinking about really cool applications, like what are the odds that a kid will do better in a test if he studies, let's say, 2 nights before the test rather than the night before the test. But here we were thinking about things that were a lot more basic. Does the school have a bathroom? If the school had 20 teachers, how many were there at the time of the census? It's very positive that a lot of the data was released, but the Ministry of Education essentially withheld all of the information regarding teachers and students. And they did this because of personal data concerns. However, that wasn't the case. Essentially, now we know what the infrastructure looks like, and after some time, after we are able to crunch the data, we'll realize that the state of the infrastructure is very depressing, but we're not being able to access the information regarding the students and the teachers. So we can do with open data is, first of all, optimize public spending. We can understand the priorities. For example, we might want a computer lab in a school, which is something desirable, but if the school does not have a bathroom, maybe we need to start with a bathroom and then work on the computer lab. And at a more advanced level, and that's the type of work that we're trying to do. First of all, you can tailor courses to student-specific needs. So when education began, we created a system that looks very much like an industrial system. So we have one lesson given to 30 or 40 students, and it doesn't really adapt. So the big opportunity that data and technology presents is that we can tailor courses to how individual students learn and to make them more effective. We can also do a lot with behavioral economics, essentially nudging students to change small behaviors that will get them to be better students. And what I would argue for in the field of education, specifically when we're talking about individual students, is for semi-open data, because there are privacy concerns. So for example, with time, we could understand that maybe someone who was a bad student in the 11th grade has, let's say, a 10% chance of dropping out of the workforce. So if you're an employer, you might not want to hire that person. However, that can provide a very biased view because, for example, I was a late bloomer. I was a mediocre student in middle school and then a good student later on in life. So according to that category, I might not be offered a job. So first of all, you need companies to be smart and to use the data in ways that are actually effective. And we were just saying, when you're 15, you don't know much about anything, so we shouldn't make very strong assumptions. But there are very legitimate private concerns. So privacy concerns. So something that I would recommend would be for the data to be used perhaps by nonprofits, multilaterals, and for them to commit to a very specific use of the data. So if I am going to use your individual data, it's to provide you better courses and to make sure that you have a better educational experience, but I shouldn't use that data to sell it to a company so that they can discriminate and perhaps affect your job opportunities.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, and I think it's what you're talking about in terms of the evolution of education data and the difficulty of getting some of the data that's really most important, like the data about teachers and students, is something that I think we're going to see country to country. So in the U.S., we've had this very this kind of I guess I would call an open data cautionary tale. Or a data collection cautionary tale, which is this company called In Bloom that was started with funding from the Gates Foundation. And the whole point of this company was to do exactly what you're describing, to say, let's get data about students, let's take it with, give it to the teachers, let's help individualize the curriculum. And they got such outrage from parents that they were originally in 7 states. One state after another said, nah, we're not doing that here, and then they went out of business. So I would wonder what, 2 things. One is we have people from everywhere here. I wonder what kinds of advice you would have to this approach in other countries, and particularly one of the things that seemed to be a problem for In Bloom that forced them out of business is that they really did not do a good job of working with communities and explaining what they were doing in a way that might have gotten their support. So I wonder if you could just talk about that a little bit as, how do you get over the obstacle of helping people understand that you're really using data about their children for a good purpose?
So what's difficult is that once you have the data and you have a conclusion or at least a suggestion of what the data says, you need to take action. So let's say if you're building a course, that's difficult because you maybe need to create 4 or 5 different versions of that course and to try to understand which one is working. But let's say that you live in a small community in Mexico, and with data we can tell you that your kid's teacher is terrible. He didn't show up for class, and he's giving them a really bad service. If you're a parent, you can think that you're empowered, but your actual odds of getting the school to change the teacher are really small. In Mexico, to change a teacher is something that is very difficult. So I think if we're going to be drawing conclusions or or ideas out of this data, we also need to tell people how to work with that data. And I think we could even see bad applications such as people, harassing teachers and saying, why are you not showing up for school, or, go get some additional courses so that you can actually teach my kids. But right now, that bridge between empowerment and what people actually do, I think is somewhat unclear. And I think if we're not deliberate into how we can tell people, this is how you can use this data, then you can have very messy outcomes such as the ones that you had in the States.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point, and I think many people, and I would certainly include myself here. It's very easy for us to get so enamored of open data that we begin to think of it as the solution to everything, and I think we have to really control expectations. Right. Open data that tells you your child has a terrible teacher will not get rid of that teacher necessarily. But there might be some kinds of open data and some kinds of performance evaluation that would improve education. So I think what I hear you saying is that thinking about how we use the data and how we set expectations and ground rules can make a huge difference, and certainly in education and other areas. Well, Jeff, I'm delighted to have you on the panel. Jeff Kaplan, who is now director of multilateral and NGO work at Socrata, one of the world's great data platform providers, and you have really a remarkable background working as a senior consultant at the World Bank, leading some of the really groundbreaking open data work that has been done there and all over the world. You were founder and director of the Open E-Policy Group, which was a pioneering network of government chief information officers and industry executives from all over the world. In addition, you've had experience on the Council of Foreign Relations, and you went to Harvard Law School. So I am turning to you to make sense of all of this. So tell us how this all ties together. I guess for starters, how do you see, with your experience, the use of open data worldwide, and particularly some of the variations that you see in different parts of the world and some of the commonalities that you see as well?
Okay, I'll try. I may not succeed in that task, but I'll try. Thank you for having me here. So I think instead of starting with the differences, I think it would be interesting to start with the commonalities. A lot of people hear a lot of examples, and it's great to hear examples, especially from places that maybe don't get talked about as much, because a lot of people kind of use the same examples of the possibility of open data over and over, and they're missing out on some things that are sort of common challenges everywhere, in small markets, in big markets, in small towns and big cities. So, I mean, starting with things that everybody has in common. So, open data and productivity can mean lots of different things, right? Making money, saving time, making better investments, making better decisions as a consumer or as just a person in your life. Those all contribute to productivity. And open data, so what's the link here? In a very simple way, open data kind of does two things. It should make access to data reduce the cost of access to data, hopefully near zero. Right? And the second thing is it should make data available in a format that can be used more easily by more people. So that's really simple, but it's very profound, because when you think about what that means for a company, a person, businesses, a social entrepreneur, it means that data, it doesn't guarantee anything, right? Open data guarantees nothing. It's not even a promise of something. It's just a possibility. Right? Open data is about the possibilities of new productivity, the possibilities of a new application that has social value, or a new company. And that possibility, no matter where you are, in a big country, I come from the US, so in a big country like the US or small countries, and I've worked in a lot of different countries, the possibilities are always there. They may have different scales, but the possibilities of data being connected to more data being connected to more people and decisions, I refer to this as something like the network value of data. Like data by itself might have some value, but when you connect it to more people and more developers and more companies and more schools, the value increases. It's just like a social network. Social network's not that useful if you're the only person on it. It's the network that makes it interesting and productive, let's say. And I'll give you a really simple example, like the price of corn. Okay, the price of corn. If you had open data on the price of corn, that's really useful. If I'm a farmer, I might know what I should sell my corn at tomorrow at the market. If I'm a consumer, I might know the price I want to pay for corn today when I go to the... But that has value, but it's limited. But think about the price of corn now with the price of all food products, and the price of fertilizer, and the price of land, and the price of fuel, and imports and exports of corn, and the production, how much corn is produced in different areas. That kind of data connected to each other, together in one place, starts to have value, not just for me thinking about buying corn tomorrow. It has value for maybe I want to build a storage facility. Maybe I have an import-export business. Maybe I think there's a better market I should be selling my corn at. It has all kinds of other possibilities, call it productivity, but it creates the possibility of a lot of other people doing new things with that more data. The way you might think about it is more data, fewer clicks, right? The idea of getting more data, connecting to more people around that data in an easier way. I mean, if you picture this, picture it like a supermarket, a supermercado de datos, right? One place where you can start to access data. And how does that happen? That means getting things connected. And that's a challenge for no matter where you are. Big countries, small countries, it's a challenge everybody shares, I think. Not enough data is connected to more data. That's sort of thinking about a big picture. But it has real implications if you are a publisher of data, if you're a government or even an organization, even a company. There are companies that are starting to open up data because it's good for their business. But the idea of having more data in one place in a more automated way so that you don't have to do one by one by one by one. That's a lot of work. Being able to share that data with more people more easily. Feeding that data to different people who want to do different things with it. Just like a supermarket, you have to know about your inventory. What data is there? What do you have? What do people want? If I walk into a supermarket, I don't want to see everything that I'm not interested in buying, right? I mean, supermarkets are very clear. They put things on the shelf that people should want to buy. So they're listening to the consumer. Same thing with data. If you're a government or an organization or a company, and you're thinking about what you can do with your data, you might want to think about what people want. I mean, think about the school census, right? They released some data on buildings, essentially. But that's not what really people are most interested in about schools, is it? They are interested in what happens inside those buildings. So that's another thing that I think is common with the countries and governments that maybe did open data first, and even ones that haven't done it yet, which is starting to think first about what people really are interested in. What do I want to find in my supermarket? What should be on the shelf? And data, just like a product, has a shelf life. It has an expiration date. It's not valuable forever. Some data is valuable for a short period of time. It's valuable in real time, like pricing. Other data has historical value, but it's important to think about that, and that's a challenge for data publishers everywhere, making sure their data is fresh, just like produce. I'll stop there.
No, I love the idea. So we are now officially launching the Con Datos Supermercado.
Supermercado de Datos.
You heard it here first. Let's talk for a little bit more about that question, and then I would love to hear questions from the audience. But I think this whole question of how do you know what people want in data is huge. So one of the things that the government of Mexico has done, which seems to have been very effective, is really began, I think, over a year ago by doing a lot of work online, surveying people, really asking people what kinds of data they were interested in. In the United States, we actually did the exact opposite. We have a history of collecting data in many, many government agencies. The first attempt to release data was data.gov. Our portal. Agencies were asked to just put out data that they thought was important. Some of it was very important. Some of it was completely useless. Some of it was almost humorous in how useless it was. So we have in the US what has been a kind of supply side tradition of data, which is the government just saying, here it is, do something with it. One of the things that we are now doing at the Gov Lab is we're actually starting a method of bringing data providers together with the people who use their data, and if anyone here is interested in that, please come talk to us after the panel. We would love to tell you about what we're doing. I'll also be talking about it a little bit in the lightning talk this afternoon. But getting back to the international perspective, what have you found to be the best ways of making that connection, and some of the best ways, or just some examples of how government agencies that really want to connect with data consumers, data customers, have been able to do it well?
I think, no, it's a really important question. I don't think there's one best way to sort of find out what people want. I think it depends what audiences you're trying to sort of get information from or hear from. And so it varies. But I think one thing that the governments who do it well, governments I'm talking about, have in common is they don't just publish data and sit back and wait, right? They actually actively try and find out what it is. And that can take different forms. That could be surveys. I mean, selective surveys, surveys of business associations, surveys of civic organizations, having actually a public survey online. I mean, there's lots of different ways to ask people what they're interested in. And there's no one way to do it. I think it just depends. But it does require outreach. You can't just sit in your chair and wait for people to tell you. A lot of times you actually do have to take affirmative action. Organizing, like a good example I think is, I've seen some countries where they've actually gone out and talked to developer communities. Because developer communities build stuff. At the end of the day, with data, a lot of times someone has to build something. They have to turn that data into something useful, because the data itself is not useful for people. Data is kind of useless for most people, me too. So they have to turn that, smart people who know how to build things, turn it into an application. They turn it into a picture. They write a story about it. And governments that do this well, and this doesn't require a lot of money. This isn't like an expensive thing. It just requires some effort. They actually outreach in different ways.
Terrific. So, you know, I've been asking a lot of questions. I would like to open it up to the audience. We would love to hear some of your thoughts. And we have 2 microphones, so we can share one with you all. Yeah. So please let us know your thoughts and your questions. And while you're thinking of them, I want to ask the other panelists. So you've all heard each other talk about different aspects of open data. Do you have any questions for each other, or any observations about what each other have said? You must. You're all very thoughtful people. All right, I'm passing the mic.
You know, I'd be really interested to hear from each of them, just really shortly, sort of what was the biggest challenge that they faced in starting the different businesses or initiatives that you started, you know, that relate to data? Like, what was the biggest challenge you had? If you had to pick one, the one thing that was hardest to do, what was it?
One is that in order to have a proper data strategy, you really need a lot of resources. So for example, let's say if we have a budget to build a course, we need to multiply that times 3 or 4, because I mean, it's not like you produce it and you're done. You need to produce it, you need to work on it for a long time, and you need to create different versions of that same course for different profiles of people. So it is quite resource intensive, but it has a lot of promise.
Sorry, I was going to say, it sounds like data has like a feedback loop. People engage and you learn something and you improve. If it's a product or a service, an educational service, you use that information to keep improving it, but that requires investing resources.
So data is our resource, it's our input, but we don't own the data. The data, it's owned by a telco, by a bank, by a retailer. So our biggest challenge was about how we convince a telco to share the data to us. And it was a kind of challenge because they are already earning $1 billion, and we say, okay, I will give you one of my most precious resources, and what are you going to give me back? And in the case of those traditional verticals, I think that at this point of time, it opened a new opportunity, because a lot of revenues were, just to give you an example of telcos, they are declining revenues because people's not texting anymore, they're not doing calls anymore, so they're feeling that they're losing revenues to Facebook to Google to WhatsApp. So what we did is to show them that there is value in their data. There is a $1 billion opportunity if they are able and savvy on how they monetize and how they use this data.
Well, I guess for Skyalert, what the biggest challenge that we have faced is how to distribute all this information. Like, if you think about the earthquake alert system for Mexico City, it has been there for more than 22 years now. But in the first 20 years, it only had 400 users. So it's around 20 users a year. So that's not very useful if you have spent a lot of money into developing the system, into maintaining it. So that's where we came in. That's where we take our challenge, and it was, how can we make it possible to get this information that is useful for everyone? And how can we make it timely and put them in their pockets? So that was our biggest challenge, like all the technology adoption, all the platforms adoption that we have taken in order to produce these now 2.1 million alert systems that are working now in Mexico City. So that's what was our challenge for. Now I think that the next challenge is, now what do we do with this data, right? Like we started to generate data, and I think that we have to make it through a process that will make even more useful to society, and not just to Mexico City, like in all the world. It's a very shaky world.
Thank you, and Jeff, great question, and thank you all for your answers. Opening it up, any questions from any of you? I have a suggestion. This is kind of a small group. I've been told that the next panel is not going to start for about 20, 25 minutes. My suggestion is that we stop talking at you through microphones. Why don't we all just hang around for a while, and we'll get up off this podium. We'll invite any of you to just sort of come up and let's have a conversation to follow up on some of the formal panel. But I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank please join me in thanking what's been a terrific panel. I'm very glad we're all able to have this conversation. Onward, more open data, Datos Abiertos, ahora, now, and forever. Thank you all very much.